Yeah, so current role, salesperson at Orb. Been here for a little over 2 years. I was our first non-engineer to join the company as employee number 10, um, and have been able to sell to a lot of our early partners and Lighthouse logos. Prior to Orb, I was at Plaid for about 16 months. I ran the gamut of enterprise outbound SDR, working with some of Plaid's most successful AEs. And then I was a startup segment AE after being promoted out of the SDR role, selling to companies 1 to 10 employee headcount size. Prior to that role, a bit of a non-traditional background. I was a college basketball coach for 7 years, as an
Hmm.
assistant at Davidson College for 5 years, and an assistant at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire for 2 years.
Amazing. Okay, actually, you know what? I feel like you're going to say a lot of great things, so I might use portions of this for social.
Okay, cool.
So I'm gonna pump you up a little bit too. And yeah, for those of you listening who don't know my relationship with Will, he and I go way back. I think we started working together 2 years ago, right? Since you started at Orb.
Yeah, July 22.
And wow, you remember the month, crazy. And he is cream of the crop in terms of first go-to-market hires, I would say. I learned a ton from Will. I see a lot of myself in Will too, in terms of how he operates, understanding the technical landscape of not only the product, but the industry, really kind of leaning in authentically. And he's had a lot of mega quarters, actually. I feel like there's multiple quarters where you were probably like 95% of the company numbers. So maybe 100% too, actually, in the early days. So super honored to have you on, Will, and thanks for answering some of my questions. Let's start with so you gave us your background. Love that you're also a college basketball coach because you know how much of a basketball junkie I am. And I think it actually bleeds into a lot of your persistence, your work ethic. But what made you want to go into sales? Talk to us about the Plaid experience. Like, what was that entry point like? Like, what was interesting for you about getting into that company and the profession? Because you started
Yeah,
as an SDR, right?
yeah, and yeah, thanks for having me. Obviously, love the relationship that we've built through sales. Nice to now have it more as like a friendship and mentorship versus just sales advisor, sales coach to IC. As far as how I got into it, it's interesting. When I was coaching at Dartmouth, I joined the coaching staff there in the, I guess, summer of 2019. Obviously, COVID happened in 2020, and we were the one Division One conference to not be participating in competition. So it was probably the first sort of stopping point I'd ever had in my life of where I was considering alternatives to coaching.
Hmm.
And my entire life, people had told me, you should go into sales, you should go into sales. And I think the general notion or the thought is like sales is like used car salesman.
Yeah.
Um, there's like some sort of like negative connotation to it when in reality, and obviously not being on the other side of it, there's so many great, really, really talented, really intelligent, fun people that you meet in the sales world. So I was pretty lucky that one of my fraternity brothers from Davidson had a very successful enterprise sales run as an AE, and at the time was an enterprise rep at Harness, for the founder that actually had sold App Dynamics to Cisco, I think for like 5 billion a few years prior.
Hmm.
So we really chatted through the opportunity and the upside, and why he thought it could be a good fit. And I was fortunate there was a Davidson alum named Baker Shogri, who was one of the early founding Plaid hires, worked with the co-founders in the Bain Atlanta office before business school and then going to product at Plaid. Got connected with him. He introduced me to my first manager at Plaid, Emerald Maravilla, who incredible run at Twilio and then led the new business team at Plaid. Hit it off with her immediately. I then started working for another awesome manager named Matt Ossett, who had a good run as a IC turned sales manager. So I was just like really lucky to, I think, be around a ton of good people where I got to see, A, the element of like strategic thinking, B, like how to lean into relationships and being authentic and being curious. And then I think the C element of what I thought worked well was I came from this world where, as a coach, you recruit, you travel, you're working on weekends a lot, you're kind of always on the go. To where when I started at Plaid and had like weekends to myself, I was like, this is kind of strange. So I kind of just obviously I've come to very much enjoy the weekends, don't get me wrong. But I think it kind of gave me this perspective of if I could really bring the same amount of intensity and work ethic that came from the coaching world and like all of the great leaders, especially the coaching staff at Davidson, that I got to be around for 4 years as a student and then 5 years as a coach. Uh, it really lended itself nicely to bring that to a sales org, while
Hmm.
not losing the stuff that I really loved about coaching of the relationships of being on a team and the competitive spirit, and trying to like win as a group towards a collective goal instead of getting caught up in maybe like the individual numbers. So pretty fortunate that I had a lot of people point me in this direction. And then obviously have benefited a ton from all the great people that I've worked with or worked for in this, man, I guess a little over 3 year run now. Not very long when you look at it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. No, that's great. I mean, like in the tech world, 3 years is a long time, right? And there's a ton of turnover in sales. So the fact that you're promoted within that time period is also pretty impressive. Let's talk about kind of the learnings you had. Like, are there like a few examples at Plaid specifically where you're like, okay, this was a big unlock for me to really truly understand tech sales. Would love to understand that. Like, who are you learning from? Were there
Yeah.
certain like deals where you were like, okay, wow, this is like where I'm really learning on the job? Yeah, talk to me about kind of what those moments were.
Yeah. So I was really lucky to get paired with some amazing AEs when I got to Plaid as an SDR. So the four AEs I worked with were Jeff Bile, Dan Hanum, Xander Ohan, and Daniel Stadlin. Um, of those four, I believe three are now in sales leadership, I think still at Plaid. All,
Nice.
all four could be if they wanted. And I don't think I'm really allowed to speak to the deals that they close, but some
Yeah,
of
of course. Yep.
biggest deals and like most reputable logos, like those folks were the ones that signed the deal. Uh, I definitely learned a little bit from each of them that I try to blend and marry to fit my style or my person. I think how they built relationships, how they presented like strategic value, how they asked like simple things such as discovery questions, not just in the first call, but in every call. Um, the way in which they set up project plans to create like cross-functional learnings and workings across the org of which they are selling to. I mean, the list goes on of like little things. I think the thing though that I really appreciated the most about that opportunity though is that I asked all of them very early on if I could assist in like the ongoing nature of the deal beyond just like the handoff. And the reason why was, I didn't want to be an SDR forever. I was starting my sales journey, at age, I guess, 28. So I was a little bit older than some of the other, AEs that had already been promoted and some of my peer SDRs that maybe this was their first job out of college. And
Hmm.
I knew that if I could, learn a lot quickly without skipping steps, that I could put myself in a really good position to become better. And the more time I spent around successful high performers like those four people, obviously the better I would become at the job. Um, so I was pretty lucky that A, they were all, terrific sellers, but B, they're like terrific people.
Yeah.
Where they would give me some autonomy to work on things, whether it was build decks, whether it was, write email follow-ups, build project plan templates based on something they had shared previously, where they would obviously then go and edit and fine tune it and make it better. And even
Hmm.
try to close a few deals for smaller, deal sizes at like enterprise-like accounts and like get hands-on coaching. Like there was a big dentistry, I guess, conglomerate that one of those folks owned that they were busy working on several other deals and they were kind of letting me help drive it, which the trust and belief to do that for someone that doesn't have selling experience is like a great stroke of confidence and obviously something I was very very appreciative of at the time and like still am now.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like it was a lot of on the job shadowing, firstly, and then actually doing the role that was super helpful. Were there any like sales trainings that were interesting to you, or do you feel like you got most of the unlock out of mentorship and coaching and seeing these deals actually play out? And I'm curious also if you're to talk to those reps that were, gracious enough to put you under their wings, like what they would say as well. Like, can you talk to me about sales training more specifically?
Yeah, obviously there's a ton of, sales training that's provided by third parties. I think there's lots of like useful tips and tricks that you can learn and things that you can apply to your day-to-day job. We worked with a company called Winning by Design when I was at Plaid that I thought was really good. But just in terms of like how I learn, how I like to learn, I really like being around the action, being around the goal, if you will, and like doing. And this is something that I think definitely relates back to my time as a coach, where I had a chance to work for Hall of Fame coach Bob McKillop, who was at Davidson for 34 years. People in tech know Steph Curry. He coached him.
Mhm.
And one of the things that Coach McKillop would do is, you would earn his trust by he would assign you to do things and you would, execute on those things. And if you did a good job, he would let you do more and more. And I think things that made me a better coach were by doing, not just, reading a book on coaching or, taking a class on coaching, but actually like having to put together film and show that film in a presentation format to the team, and getting the opportunity to do that, and if it went well, getting to do it some more. So I think very similar to that, being around these successful people by getting to do the job and try things out and ask for feedback. Like if I were to do something and they're like, hey, I tweaked this or that, and I could ask why. The
Yeah.
fact that how busy those folks were, they were willing to give me that coaching and feedback. It was terrific. Like it made me a lot better, from the practice versus maybe like the theory, if you will.
Yeah, totally. Because there's so much art in sales, right? Like and every single sales situation is different. It doesn't matter if you have like 30 years of sales experience, like the next deal is still going to be very different, I think,
Right.
right? Depending on how the organization operates and the culture of the prospect that you're dealing with. So appreciate you sharing all of that. In terms of let's fast forward a little bit now to Orb because okay, so you were in the closing role at Plaid. Plaid was how many employees when you left?
Ooh, I think I joined when we were around 500, 550. I think I left right before we were 1200. So I was there, right after our Series D funding closed,
Yeah,
and left, that would have been, I guess, May or June of 2022.
got it. Yep. So still like small considering like the entire population of companies out there, but large compared to Orb. Orb was how many employees when you joined? Maybe like
I
eight,
was
nine.
number 10. I was number 10.
You
Yeah.
were
So
number 10.
obviously very,
Wow.
very different sort of
Yeah.
experience.
Okay, so tell me about your experience joining Orb. Like what was that like? How is that different? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any sort of drastic change like that, probably first worth acknowledging the transition period. Have a very good friend who, his name's Ian Feeney. He runs the Canon project. He actually has built out a lot of early stage go-to-market teams. Ian introduced me to the founders, Alvaro Morales and Chitesh Grover, as they, I think, were part of South Park Commons prior to their seed round from Greylock. And I believe Ian's close with both the Greylock and the SBC teams. And when I got to meet them, it was pretty clear they were solving an interesting problem that was somewhat adjacent to, the pricing model that we had at Plaid, which was consumption based or, minimum versus usage based. And I didn't, totally grasp the ins and outs of the technical challenges on call one, but it became pretty clear throughout the interview process that like this actually was like a really large opportunity. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so when I got started, it was a huge learning curve, like things that I kind of just took for granted at Plaid, given that that was my first foray into tech sales after coaching. I realized like we didn't have. So things like our pitch deck, I think, was in Figma and was not in Google Slides. I
Mm-hmm.
had never used Figma prior, so I probably could have. I just asked Alvaro if he could put it into Google Slides so I could more easily take advantage of that. Things like, case studies and, ROI calculators and things that kind of just were available. Obviously, we didn't have. Um, Target account list fully built out. Like we had an idea of who we wanted to sell to. We had some customers. But it wasn't, hey, here's your named accounts when you walk into the door, like get cranking on that or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big change, and it ultimately was what I wanted. Like I wanted to get back to something that was much more like a basketball team of a smaller group, where you're, you're getting to like play a role on a team where, if there are basketball roles of a point guard, a shooting guard, forward, centers, whatever, very similar to like an early stage startup where you have, the engineers, the founders, maybe a salesperson, maybe someone in marketing or finance, maybe a product person, dev success, depending on when you join. That sort of cross-functional nature seemed like a lot more fun. So that was like a driving factor, and it ultimately was. I think as the first salesperson, I got to do a lot of things in the first 90 days. Went to some conferences and walked around and reverse pitched people at their booths. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, I appreciate you putting up with me. Uh, Got to build out messaging and tweak messaging that already existed. The founders had been using during like the founder-led sales motion. Got to kind of be the voice of the customer, almost like product like in the sense of taking, feedback and responses from live calls. And we use Gong for call recording and bringing that back to the engineering team and the founding team so they could hear, what customers are saying about what exists in the product or what they would like. Uh,
Hmm.
all while, trying to generate pipeline, close deals, and really try to like scale this thing from where we were to where we wanted to go. And you mentioned earlier, maybe I was 99, 95% of the company number. Like for a while I was our only salesperson, so I was 100% of the company number, where it was myself and the two co-founders. The three of us were salesperson, solutions eng, sales eng, and executive sponsor, like all in the same room. So it was a fun challenge, and one where there's a lot of fun wins. There are some frustrating losses, but obviously that
Yeah.
comes with anything when there's competition.
I think, yeah, one thing I remember is you were just always on. So I think that basketball coach weekend hustle like definitely translated. I feel like you were always thinking about orb, and also you did a great job communicating cross-functionally because there wasn't success, there wasn't marketing even when you joined, I don't think,
There's
right?
not.
No sales engineer for sure. So the way that you communicated on Slack kept everybody updated, I think was really a case study in how to do it as a first go-to-market hire. So kudos to you on that. Um, Tell me about, like the actual deals, if you don't mind. So don't talk about the names, obviously, because
Sure.
you can't talk about the numbers and the deal sizes or anything. But tell me about how that changed when you first joined compared to when you left, because you were closing some large deals as you were exiting Orb, right? Because you're going on to
Yeah.
the company in a
Yeah.
couple of weeks here.
Yeah. So, we were really fortunate to close some very exciting, six-figure deals with some of the most reputable brands in tech and, dev tools or cloud infra or AI or, really fintech, whatever vertical it may be. I think when I look back or think about like the early days, the the challenges that we had to tackle were, why should we trust a seed stage startup to do something so critical like our billing infrastructure?
Hmm.
Um, how can we trust a team of less than 15 people? Talk to me about who your other customers are. Um, why are you guys able to command this really high price point? Things like that, where it makes you appreciate social proof and
Yeah.
customer testimonies or customer testimonials where they're sharing, hey, the reason why we made this choice for this software was XYZ reason, and you slap it up on your website, PM from Microsoft or whatever, right?
Yep.
Obviously, we
Yep.
didn't have any of that. So
Sure.
we had to be creative in how we really built trust, I think was like the biggest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we just like defaulted to including in our sales process, like one was a customer reference call. So talk to one of our early customers, hear about the support we offer, hear about when they evaluated us against the competition, why they chose to partner with Orb, talk about how they've delivered on, specific or bespoke asks if we needed to build something. And that was great because
Mhm.
I think we, despite not having like customer success or someone in like an account manager seat, the account managers were the founders. And so these early customers really got to feel the love.
Yeah.
Uh,
And instead of that being a weakness, it was a strength, right?
it
Yeah. You
definitely
kind
turned
of
into a
turned that
strength.
on its head. Yeah.
You went from maybe being somewhat skeptical about Orb to then being like, wow, like it sounds like these guys, despite being a small team, are like really delivering.
Hmm.
Uh, Another thing that I think was like a great fit and need for us was a executive roadmap conversation. So obviously not something you can do with every deal that you're trying to close. But for the really strategic deals and the really sizable contracts, we felt it was to our advantage to be able to share some of the things that were on our roadmap, and even like validate that with customers. Not like, hey, here's what's on our roadmap, like get with us or get lost type of situation, but more of, hey, here's what we're working on. Like, we want you to see like what's coming down the pike here based on what current customers have asked for, also about what we know is important as folks that have built billing at companies like Asana, Stripe, Samsara, elsewhere.
Yeah.
And this was great because it got to it gave access to buyers to our founding team, and they got to connect with our co-founders, who are both two terrific guys, and B, like, even provide recommendations of like, hey, what would be really cool is if you guys would think about including this, or tangential to what you're already building, like maybe you could offer something like this, and that
Yeah.
influenced some of the things that we ultimately rolled out to where those folks got access to this
Totally.
type of
Yeah. It's
offering.
like the start of a true collaboration, right? It's not just something you say that you want to build a partnership. You're
Right.
actually like acting on it before the contract's closed.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
some folks required contractual commitment for us to build things, but I think what was pretty cool, there was one deal that closed last July, actually, with a really reputable dev tool platform, where they wanted a very specific feature contractually committed to. We built it, we delivered, and then from a seller's perspective, I got to take that feature and go sell it to other folks that I knew, based on use cases or type of business, like could be a really good fit for them. So I
Yeah.
think that relationship piece and that trust piece went a long way as we try to create more and more social proof with things like case studies and logos on your website and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the last piece I'll tell you on this front is like the pricing element.
Mhm.
I think just from when I joined and thinking about pricing, and having seen other early stage founders pricing as well, oftentimes it's kind of like a hand wavy, like which way is the wind blowing and how hard type activity,
Yeah.
where I think we got pretty clear, and a lot of this was due to like your guidance and help and advice to our team, was how can we build conviction in how we are pricing and how we are communicating how we are pricing. And building billing infrastructure is like a pretty painful thing for engineering and product teams, and it impacts every team: revenue, finance, systems, ops, etc. To where there was a reason to command a high price point there, when you're replacing the work maybe of 1 to 2 to 3 engineers that are working on billing, and letting those folks go back to work on customer facing or like highly leveraged product launch type initiatives, and leave like the messiness and the non-core competency stuff to us. So I think being able to really speak to that, and show that during the evaluation, also like greatly helped us, and built a lot of confidence from our now partners into like how thoughtful Orb is, not just to like the
Mm.
product set, but also like what is the benefit of the value for your company.
Yeah, it showed that you like really thought about the price point, right? I think the last thing too that you did really well that I don't see a lot of early sales reps do is you got really technical in terms of the differentiators to be able to have that conversation too, because obviously part of the equation of the pricing is, hey, we're going to replace teams of workloads with this software. But I think the other part of it that you conveyed really well is nobody else on the market has what you guys do in terms of how you've architected usage-based billing to be easy, right? And so how you talked about like ELT versus ETL models for like billing data, I think was pretty crucial as well. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think you had almost like a sales engineering type level of that differentiator too, where you knew at a pretty high confidence level that no other competitor can touch that sort of like under the hood secret sauce.
Yeah, again, like you obviously helped us. You've been a huge part of the sales journey. Let's just call it that.
Appreciate that,
So
man.
I'll stop telling you. I'll stop saying every time we get to a new topic, oh yeah, you helped us with that. But I think what was great was that with you, with me, with our founders, with our team, we were able to sort of figure out what are some of the ways that we can show up with a sort of consultative partnership, or with a really digestible technical concept that removes the feel of Will the salesperson as a seller, and more it replaces that with like Will as a partner, or like a consultative, thought leader or thought sharer, probably not leader.
Yeah.
Um, but
Oh, definitely thought leader. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't know about all that. But something where you can really get a lot of credibility with the technical audience we were selling to of, PMs and IC engineers and engineering managers, CTOs, whatever it may be. And so I think, when we were able to crack that code, that helped a lot in terms of building that confidence. But I think the other piece of, one of the things that I really tried to do early on is get to the why and get to like the full understanding of the product to where I'm not a salesperson that just shows up and talks about pricing. I'm not a salesperson that just shows up and runs you through a deck, but like I'm a salesperson that can actually have the technical conversation you want to have. I remember there was an email, I can't remember who sent it to me, but a prospect once said like, hey, like, please be sure to bring a sales engineer to the call. And I didn't. We didn't have one at the time. I just went.
Yeah,
And I think they left the call like thinking that maybe I was a sales engineer. They weren't sure, which was great. Like obviously I don't think they
for
would ever,
sure.
yeah, this guy's an engineer or developer, but I think it was good because it just allows you, the early seller, to do the work. And deals don't slow down because you have to match, calendar availability with some of the
Hmm.
technical team members with what your prospects are. If you can just go to the call and ultimately come with, answers to the technical questions or at least a perspective on them. And then
Yeah.
for anything that you might not know, which is obviously going to happen, you take that back to the team. Hey, XYZ asked us about how do we do this or how do we do that or where in the documentation something is. And typically when you're the one asking the question and going back to get the answer, it sticks with you. You remember it a little bit. So next time that question shows up, you're in a better position to answer it and continue to build that confidence with your technical buyer.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely built that like sales engineering skill set, I would say. And oftentimes with startup sales, you only have like the first call to really grab somebody's attention. So you can't do the whole like discovery and then okay, second call, let me do the demo, right? You kind of have to do it all in like a concise, consolidated package. So it's amazing that you were able to do that in the early days. So you haven't tell me about kind of at Orb, what did you kind of alluded to it, you learned like cross-functionally how to work in a smaller team. Like obviously there's a unique aspect to startup sales, but you never really had formal training at Orb, right? It was like true on-the-job training, I would say. So what are moments that helped you grow as like a skilled seller in like the last 2.5 years, would you say?
Yeah, so I'm still waiting for my Peter on sales basketball jersey so I could like wear it to like the lake or the beach or something. Just be a billboard for you. But I think,
I can't wait. It's still here. It's in a box. I
all
just gotta
right, yeah,
move on that.
unbox that puppy.
Let
Send
me get
send
my
it this way.
assistant to send it to you.
Yeah,
Not that I have
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
AKA me. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. But I think, very similar to what we talked about earlier of like theory versus practice. Had you come and said, "Hey, Will, like uh theory says this is what you should do. This is the framework you need to follow. This is everything that needs to be completed for a deal to move from like where it is to where you want it to go." I probably wouldn't have jived with that as much. But I think one of the things that you brought early on to the team was like, hey, in previous experiences, I found this to work sometimes. Have you tried it? And we were able to actually like have a conversation about what had been tried and what had not. And I think there's two like very early examples that come to mind. One is with one of the larger deals that we signed, AI company that they were evaluating Orb versus our largest competitor. And we were able to talk a lot about, cross-threading and multi-threading in Slack because a lot of engineering and product teams aren't really going to work out of email in the sense
Mhm.
of they're not checking their email like a salesperson or maybe a finance person would. And so providing like very concise recaps of, hey, I had this conversation with this one or two, person people, but share it in the broader channel with some of the things that we discussed, like in a very like concise manner, and then what the next like action items were. And ultimately what this unlocked was a few things. One, it got the eyes of the broader team that's involved in the evaluation. There were oftentimes like either the contract signer or some executive presence in the Slack channel where they could see like the level of like organization and like details we were going through. And then finally it allowed us to revert back to that because naturally there are going to be times in deals where things go quiet or priorities get um shuffled a little bit. So being able
Mhm.
to point back to action items and like shared responsibilities, I think that really helped from a comms perspective.
Yeah.
This the second thing that you and I did, and that's something that I've used in every deal, moving forward since this point. This was probably something we did over a year ago. And you may remember it. We put together a milestone calendar, which is kind of like a mutual action plan for folks that use those, but where we mapped out, hey, here are all the things that have to happen from a deal to go start to finish when evaluating orb, and here are the little things that could come up, and like little things, they're not so little, but like security review being kicked off, a budget conversation being kicked off. Like obviously like very, very important steps, but oftentimes salespeople can get bogged down in like the technical scoping and the product conversations and the discovery
Hmm.
conversations when like if you can do these other things effectively and quickly, it just is going to accelerate the time to close for the deal. And so we put together these milestone calendars of which we've used now with all of the strategic deals that we've signed at Orb, and it's a shared Google sheet where there's an owner, a status, some amount of like notes of things that need to be addressed, and it creates like a very nice shared collaboration doc if you don't want to pay for a collaboration like sales software. I
Yeah.
think it gives a nice more personal touch versus like using a tool that you might have to log into. And we would just pin
Yeah.
that to Slack channels and be able to like reference that to make sure we were driving deals forward, and then just constantly checking in. Hey, we're working towards a sign by date of July 25th. We're a little less than 2 weeks away from that. Want to confirm that we're still good. Like here are the remaining things that have like a status of like unfinished or in progress that we need you to work on.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a great touch. And if folks are looking for something to keep themselves and the prospects organizing deals, like definitely something that you all should reach out to Peter about.
Nice. I love that. You're like incepting a lead magnet here that I could
You got
create,
it. You got
for
it.
my founders, right? And yeah, and I think the key thing there too is what you said around like theory versus practice. There's definitely a lot of iterations we went through as well, right? It's not like I told you, hey, like we should do a milestone calendar and it was created. There was a lot of back and forth too about like what is the right sizing based off of orb. And like, what's the Fortune 500 sales team version of this, which is super heavyweight and bloated? And what's like the startup version of it that
Right.
still feels like light and fresh? And so, I think that collaboration was super fun.
Can
Awesome. Well,
I
appreciate you. Yeah.
can I add one more thing on that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that maybe is just like a theme of like early stage selling versus
Yeah.
maybe later stage is just like the agility element is that there are going to be a lot of things that folks have done before, have done at other companies, or maybe even like you, the seller, have done other places that are going to work really well. And there are going to be other things that folks or you have done that worked really well at a previous company that's just not going to work at all. And so I
Hmm.
think you have to be, agile and thinking, if you will, of
Yes.
where if something's not working, don't try to just like keep hammering it. Maybe try
Yes.
something else just for comparison's sake, for that like iteration element that you mentioned, to see if there's a better way to do it. Because I'm sure you'll find quickly that if you're willing to try a few things out and something's working, you're not just going to stick to what you've done, nine other times if it's not working. Stick with the thing that's going to work well and that you can scale with and,
Totally.
ideally improve over time.
Yeah, I think the other component is that like sales leadership and just leadership in general, I think oftentimes is so focused on pushing a framework or like their agenda. But I think what a lot of sellers are looking for when judging leadership is like how agile can they be? Or like a coach like myself, right? Like to your point, we tried a lot of things and I suggested a lot of things. Some of them didn't work, right? Because they were relevant for like Dropbox and Slack, but they weren't for Orb. So I think that kind of like collaboration, if you are doing sales training or sales coaching, like I think it's super important, right? Because
Yeah, and
nobody can be right 100% of the time, but you can be right in the way that you work towards, a framework or like a strategy
yeah,
that works, right?
yeah,
Like the execution and the communication portion of that.
I agree. I hate to keep using sports analogies or sports references, but I think a good way to think about this is like in football, oftentimes there's an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. And if I'm an offensive coordinator and I inherit a team or inherit a roster, maybe I didn't recruit all of them, it would probably be unwise of me just to, without ever seeing how they play or what works well or who's on the team, to say, hey, these are the plays that we're going to run. And, this is what I did at my previous school or previous job. And this is what we're going to stick with. Versus maybe having, hey, this is what I want the identity or the system of the team to be. Maybe
Hmm.
tweak a few things to best fit like the skill sets that we have, And then, over time, as things grow and as things scale, yeah, you can probably get closer and closer to that identity that you want for like your team or your org. But in the early days, yes, I agree with you. I think just like the give and take between like player coach is really, really important to figure out what works best for the team versus maybe like what one person wants more than the other or something like that.
Yeah, you got to get that buy-in from the group, right? So, yeah, I think it's really important. Well, hey, Will, this was amazing conversation. I started off saying that this is going to be an interview that I won't share with anybody, but because, as you know, I'm like also writing this book, but I think there are so many nuggets that my founders could gain from. So, I'll share this with you afterwards, and we'll figure out which portions we can definitely.
Great.
I think most of it, hopefully, we can. Um, but before we end this thing, any kind of last final words of wisdom for founders or early stage sellers, even, thinking about the 0 to 1 to $2 to $3 million journey?
Yeah, I think I can't remember which CEO I saw say this, but it was a former salesperson that turned CEO. And I think he said it's a lot easier as a founder to start conversations than it is as a salesperson. And I've seen that here. Like, part of our pipeline generation strategy is figuring out what messaging should come from me, the salesperson, versus what messaging should come from a founder or co-founder. And I think the best early stage motion that I have seen is when the founders and the salespeople can work in tandem and really like leverage like the founder brand and the founder story and like the why
Mm,
we built this type mentality to
yeah,
kick off those conversations. Because for a first time learner of XYZ product, they're probably going to be more excited to talk to, my boss than they are me.
yeah.
That's and nothing wrong with that. Like if I'm a salesperson, I should lean into that and really try to figure out ways to help my founders like spread outreach around, whether it's email or LinkedIn or in person or dinners or whatever it may be. So I think that will be a great amplifier of what your company is doing. And it's also going to accelerate the time to get into more conversations, get more learnings about the product, identify what that ICP really looks like, and then really
Hmm.
ideally be able to scale more efficiently and more effectively. The
Yeah,
second
yeah,
thing that I'll tell you that I think is really important, and you and I have talked about a lot before, is being able to disqualify.
yeah.
I think in the early days when you have a target, your investors are telling you we want you to hit a certain number or get to a certain point by XYZ date. Every deal feels like it's like life or death, like to get it across the line.
Hmm.
And in reality, it can lead to you spinning your wheels on deals that just like aren't a good fit. I'm sure you've talked about strip lining and other sessions, so I won't go into that here. But I think what
Yeah.
really changed for us was when we really started focusing on, hey, these are the high intent prospects that are really needing what we have to offer. They're not asking us to build a bunch of new features that are like
Hmm.
one-offs, and they're going to be able to greatly benefit from what we have to offer right now, to where, we weren't having to go down the email tunnel of, hey, circling back, hey, bumping this back up, hey, checking back in to try to get someone to talk to us. It really was much more of a collaboration during the evaluation, like, hey, this is how we're thinking about it. Here are the things that you're responsible for. Here's what we can help in the meantime to get to that contract signature and then kick off that actual like formal relationship. So I think that's really important and something that is scary for people to disqualify
Totally. I
early.
talk about this all the time. It's like a very common founder-led sales mistake, right? So appreciate you summarizing both of those things. Well, Will, thanks again for the chat. Knock is very lucky to have you. That's your next stop, I know.
Thank
You've
you.
brought such a wealth of wisdom to Orb, to Plaid, and to myself too in my coaching practice. So I appreciate everything you've done, man, and the
Oh, you
support.
too, man. Right back at you. No, I
Nice.
appreciate you having me on, and this was great. Hopefully, we can do it again.